I don't want to waste too much time, so I'll just start with this. My name is Sunil and I like JavaScript. And this talk for me is like really personal, mostly because like the module that I'm about to show you guys is actually slightly reflective of the way that I like to write code in itself. This is one of my first, not one of my first modules, but this module I basically wrote an usage first, and then I wrote the actual details. I asked myself what I would like it to look like before actually delving into the details of it. In fact, I only actually just managed to get it working last night. Anyway, so about philosophy and about writing code and Node. Whenever you go, there's this entire argument about frameworks versus libraries and about micro frameworks and whether you should use jQuery and ext and all that jazz. I've started thinking deeply about how these choices that we make for our application actually affect the entire life cycle. Something as simple as saying, oh, we'll just use jQuery, it'll handle it. It actually defines a whole bunch of the nature of your application. For example, you would already have about 100K of code on the page. So the amount of code that you can push to the page after that gets diminished. I mean, ideally you want as little code as possible. This is the unique thing about JavaScript. We just can't worry about whether the code works, but we also want a small footprint so that it'll be performant and all that. So these choices that we make in terms of frameworks affects the way that we actually write our code. If you have used YUI or Dojo, you know that you have to define like a module and a namespace. If you used ext, you know those entire long Java style class names and all that. And those are all decisions that we make. I'm not saying they're wrong, but you should be aware that they actually set up the nature of your application itself. So in that case, I've actually been thinking about why we use frameworks. We say frameworks, we use frameworks because it makes our stuff easy, but that's an easy answer. There's no real detail to that. Why we use frameworks is because we want to enforce some form of structure on our application, right? Because we want to say, oh, we are going to be having views and models and controllers, and they will be classes that follow a particular interface, and so on and so forth. And I'm not a big fan of that, mostly because A, they're non-standard ways of making modules, which means that the next time somebody wants to use your code, they'll have to pull all the choices and decisions that you made regarding your code into their code. So for example, if you make a jQuery plugin, and it's a jQuery plugin that does placeholder text. This is the first thing you guys look for when you want to say, oh, I want placeholders for my input thing. So by the time you do that, then the next person who comes along and sees the implementation, he's like, oh shit, I have to use jQuery now. So the idea is, anyway, so when I'm writing modules, you want to basically break it down to only the things that you want to expose and not a whole bunch of functionality, and that's what I've tried. Secondly, moving on, the holy grail of Node. Everybody here knows what Node.js is, right?
Yeah.
If I'm saying something you don't understand, please let me know because I'm running on something like 3 hours of sleep, so you'll have to tell me if I'm slurring or anything. Anyway, so the holy grail of Node was about code reuse between the server and the browser. I mean, you could use the same language, and that's great because a whole bunch of amateur front-end engineers overnight became amateur server-side engineers, which is great. It's good. And anyway, but when they come and they realize that you actually have to write your code in a different way. The request response cycle is different in Node, right? And you don't really want to set up 100 objects that are listening to events and so on and so forth. You want very little stuff. So there's that disconnect between the way you write code for your browser and the way you write code for Node. And how it's basically turned out now is, oh, you're just using Node for server-side stuff to pump out an HTML, and you actually have other client-side code using Backbone or using Backbone or whatever it is. And then these entire new breed of real-time frameworks are coming in, where they're like, don't worry about it, we'll take care of your server-side rendering for you, and synchronizing objects, and router, and so on and so forth. Good examples are like Meteor.js, Derby.js, Mojito. Does anybody use Mojito? Are there any Yahoo engineers here? Well, I was, so never mind. But there are all these frameworks that ask you to make these decisions about how your templates are going to look, how your models, they ask you to use this object synchronization thing and they just assume it's going to be easy, but those are serious decisions for the nature of your application. And unless you buy into their entire philosophy about how to build apps and upload code to their YC-sponsored servers, you're really not going to get off the ground, and it's very hard to get there. So, on that note, I decided, okay, I don't want to really do this. I don't want to use Meteor, I don't want to use Derby or Mojito. just to solve one problem. And I'll tell you what that problem is. The nice thing about SEO, right? Google, you want your page to be able to render without having client-side code, pull data from somewhere or anything. Otherwise, you lose Google juice. And while you can do that, then it starts becoming hard using the same code that generates your HTML on the server to use it on the browser, because on the browser you're saying, oh, but I have a backbone element and then I have another service that pulls it and all that. So I brought down all the common functionality that this does, and I'll tell you what I want to do, right? I can share my templates right now between Node and the browser. Everybody does this. You use your EJS templates, underscore templates, handlebars, mustache. You use something which is basically a function that takes data and returns a string. That's the basis of all templating languages. And then you just spit out this HTML that gets generated. You spit it out to the client. But you lose this entire context that this HTML was generated with. Fair? All the data or particular points. Let's say, for example, you're building a search page, right? One of your sections is going to be a little block that's going to be your input section. Then you have a results thing. And inside that are all individual results sections. You lose all this context when you head towards the browser, because obviously you're just sending back an HTML string. But that's the bit that is actually important or useful for us on the browser side, because you want to know what those sections are. So you'll say, oh, this is my search element. I'll pass it on to this backbone search view that I made, right? You want that data also to come out, to be exposed to the browser, and for them to use it in whatever way they want. Nice thing is that if you expose that, I'm jabbering, I know, I'll get to code, don't worry. If you expose this element thing to the browser and you load the same code that you used on the server, then you just have a quickly synced up version. I'll get to code, it just makes more sense. Let's do this, alright? Alright, so I ask myself, how do I want to write my UI? So, sudom is equal to.
Can everybody read in the back? Maybe you can read. Ah.
It's not even going to be good code. Alright, so I ask myself, how do I want to write this search application? This search UI, so to speak. And this is how I go about it, right? I'd say UI is equal to make myself a little component. I'm calling it DOM here, sudom here, pseudo DOM, so whatever. And I say, okay, UI.define a little input area. Yeah? And use the template. Let's say I have a templates object dot input. So far, so good. You're just setting itself up where the template that you use will be this. Let's define a couple of other areas. Let's say I have results dot template. What are templates?
So are you on the client or the server?
No, this is going to be both.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to rewrite this code. I want to be able to generate this UI in one shot. I say choose this, and then I'll define underneath that, I'll define a subsection. So there'll be a whole bunch of result elements, and then let's say that, yeah, this seems like a way that I could write my thing. In fact, all that template really does, I'm calling it template, but all it does is accepts a function that returns a string when you pump data into it. So all your templates, every templating language you use right now should be compatible with this. Fair? Alright? And then I say, when I actually want to render it, I want to say app is equal to UI.render some data. Right? And what I want is for this like ambush. So at this point I wanted to generate the HTML that I need, or to represent that. And I want this to work on both client and browser. So let me just jump into the app I built, so it'll just make it a little simpler. So I've set up a little node thing here. This is just an Express base setting. I haven't done anything fancy. My actual app.js, this is the Express stuff. But this is the bit I want you to see. Right? I've decided to make a search for locations, like for maps or whatever you're using for, but you could do this with Google results, Twitter results, whatever. So I set up a little proxy for my search API, so that if I'm doing it, it uses the same URL structure as the place where I'm getting the data from. The benefit of this is that when I'm making an AJAX request from my client or from the browser, the URL stays the same, only the host changes. Cool. I say UI is required lib.app. Let's have a look at what that looks like. So, like I said, I have UI where I define it like this. Yeah. And I have a little search module which basically just does a AJAX request to that point and gets back the results. I have templates. These templates are basically compiled versions of this. So this is my input component. Again, this is in EJS, but I don't see why you wouldn't be able to do this in handlebars. Okay, so I have a little input component. I have a results folder, and inside my results folder I have something. I expose a function called $, which lets you do subviews. So you see what this means? That basically it's going to cycle through all the locations, and for each location generate one of these. Fair? This is how we build applications so far. You're just making pieces, partials, and so on. So I broke this up into separate files to show that you can use different templates. Shouldn't matter. And then I run it through a little compile script that I wrote, which generates this. Right? This is pre-compiled versions of your templates. Again, you guys do this already. Yes, if you guys are using templates, you pre-compile it to some form, or even if you don't, it doesn't matter. As long as they become functions that you can pass data into and return strings. Okay? So I have my UI. Let's look at my app. Again, none of this code is node or browser specific, and you will notice that I don't use a single element ID anywhere. This is the important bit for me, because otherwise you have to say, oh, I'm going to give it hash search and hash sidebar and then link it back up in my code at all. No, I'm not using any IDs. I've just made my little structures and I'm going to access those structures that way. So I have a little app here, which you could call this a controller action, I suppose, that for a given search term, it just finds it and renders the data. The data is obviously the query and whatever locations come back. Here, and this is nice, if you've ever wanted to know how to detect whether your JavaScript is running in Node or the browser, that's your snippet. Santosh the guy who wrote Santosh what was Rajan, oh my god, yeah, so he actually helped me with this. I was using something like this.window, but this is a lot cleaner and it's nice. But the fact that I can do that means that I can add my event handlers only on the browser, and this is important. I don't want to run this code on the Node side. I'll make this simpler, but again, this is nothing, alright? I'm still using my same search function that, mind you, this code runs on Node as well. I'm going to search for something and update results. I do a little push state stuff as well, and I'll show you why. But this is my entire app file. Okay, so right now I'm at a place where I have my templates. I have a little model set up, and I can just I can just run it. Inside here, let's see again. So you'll take it and render it. Let me just run it. So. Okay, so for now there's nothing obviously. It's just a plain input box. But let's try messing with the URLs. So I registered, Q to be able to do it. So I press Q Bangor and it actually does a search, right? You can have a look at the page source to make sure that this is actually rendered on the server side. But the interesting thing now is that since I've loaded the exact same code, I can continue typing here what I want, and it just works. All it's doing is taking that code and updating that little section. Takes it, dumps it into the template, generates HTML, runs it here. You want to search for New York. Keep an eye on the URL as well. Come on, New York. Yeah. Keep an eye on the URL. I'm just using simple history.pushDate for that, no libraries. But the fun part is that now if I do a refresh, that it actually loads the same thing. Again, you can have a look at the page source. These are the actual elements. And the only extra thing that I'm adding is this little mapping of elements to sections. This is the important bit for me, because now I can pull off stunts like this. If I want to actually get a hold of what the search element was. Not the search, let's look at results. Yeah, see? Again, I'm not using an ID, that's the name of my section that I used. So in other words, your designers or whoever can mess with your templates, change your class names, IDs. Doesn't matter, that's not what you're concerned about, because that's part of the content. You're interested in the meta as to what you're calling it, right? So let's just do a refresh. So this still works without having actually run anything client side, right? Like this was actually rendered server side, where I did this and now I have access to the element. If I want access to a to the second element. So this works. And mind you, this code where I say result/result2, I don't know if you can see that. So this works on Node as well, this specific code where I can get a hold of that thing. But then you ask yourself, well, when I said dot render, it returns a string, but here I'm getting elements. And that's where this is where you start leveraging the JavaScript part instead of relying on the framework. Because there's a little trick about JavaScript that if you say var o is equal to a little object, where one of your elements, one of your members is 3. Right, let's just take this and try this out, right? That's not X. O. So I say O, but if I say O plus this thing, then it actually returns me the string version. I don't even have to call toString. Really cool. I love this thing about JavaScript that you can just do this. You can even override value of if you want to see what the number, what it becomes when you try to add it with the number and all that. But this makes it interesting because that means now I can make an object that represents a bunch of other objects, and as long as I have a toString function on it, I can compile the whole thing inside the toString function and string it out. I don't have to save it as a string at any point. And I can use it and I wonder if I have app.flex. Yeah, that's kind of it. So but then I want to show you like I got a parlor trick about this. So I say show advanced settings, and I do content settings, and I say don't run any JavaScript, and I reload this, and this is still working, which means Google gets it, whatever, and then I can do this and press enter, and my page still works without JavaScript or without any of the other thing, because all I'm doing then is just doing a form submit on this, and it's running the exact same code. So with all my view rendering logic is now in one place. It's not just my templates, but I have my model, which is basically a service layer, and it's just doing AJAX requests. And I have my templates, and I have the actual views that represent the state itself, running on both Node and the server seamlessly. And this is happening without the addition of any additional frameworks. If you don't even have to load your original app code, because since this is coming over here, you could write it's coming with paths to every. Let me see if I can pretty print that quickly for you. Just let me pretty print this out for you. Right, so it comes with paths to all the elements. So in other words, you don't even have to load your original code. Maybe you have some backbone code that you'd like to write, or somebody else wrote your jQuery plugins and all that. And all you really need is what element exists at the component search, or what is the second result that came out. No class names, no IDs, and pure view synchronization across Node and the browser without any extra code. And this thing compressed, after gzipping it comes to about 2K of code. That's trivial. That's less than what you're going to send on your fav icon. I guess it's less than the code of your fav icon. I don't know. 2K is nothing. To put it into context, the regular Twitter avatars that you have are about 50 to 100K. In other words, you could probably inline the entire code and run it as one app, and you're not using Meteor or Derby, but you get all the benefits of this synchronization thing as long as you keep, you try to understand what it is that you're implementing. Now obviously this doesn't do object synchronization in real time over WebSockets and all that jazz. But if I want to do that, then I'll build another model for that. I will make a conscious decision to do just that section instead of saying, alright ext.js, wash over me and I'll have 50 widgets by the end of the day. Now I want to be more disciplined about the way I write my code, because it's actually leading to stronger results and having to write less. Can you imagine what the unit tests on this would be like? It'd probably be 3 lines. Take this section, this section, this section. Make sure that the element rendered has this data, or this element gets rendered. You could run a regex on it. On the Node side, I'm not even running JS DOM or some funky jQuery thing which converts it into a DOM node structure. No, it's just string manipulation, which means it's as fast as any other templating solution that you have. I've been jabbering for a while, so I'm going to just quickly break to questions, and then I'll get back to jabbering some more. Questions? Does this not work? Like, I kind of thought it was cool, so. Put it to you this way, right? When you're hiring your hotshot new client-side programmer, but the idiot only knows how to do client-side JavaScript, and it's very hard to do this Google thing where he has to write his own templates in PHP or whatever it is, or maybe even in Node. But it gets hard for him to follow the request response cycle and all. All you tell him is, dude, you give me the UI structure of how you want it to be. You define it like this, use whatever templating language you want, use whatever services or AJAX requests that you want. And a designer could write this, right? Like I could, instead of writing define, I'll make it D, maybe that'll make it simpler for them. Somebody who is not very good at JavaScript and DOMs and all that, all he's really doing is defining exactly what it's going to look like. And I don't have this working as part of the API. Another improvement I want to do, once you say this, let's say then you can reuse these components as well. So you'll say UI.clone, and I'm going to take the results section and make all of them red. You see what I mean? You could work in teams by saying, okay, I'm going to define this structure. You are going to do just the search results section. You define a section which is called UI sudom of results, and I'll take that and I'll incorporate it into the structure that I'm building. You can build different pieces truly modularly, test them individually, and then seamlessly put them together and have them work across Node and the browser. That's a really long sentence. Let's just say that this is good for you. Do it this way. Okay. Yeah, but questions. I'll just pop to questions.
How about the larger applications going to be the bigger applications? How it will be scalable?
I feel so. Look, all that is really, the extra stuff that it pumps out is really just this element map, right?
The response structure.
Huh?
Response structure.
Response structure.
When the local host, the response structure.
This?
Yeah, in the header.
In the header, you want to Oh, you want to start? Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Wait, let me do that. So I have local storage on this because it gives a nice little instant feel, but let's just load this up again, okay? So since you want to see that. Oh, and I'm not sure if you can see it. I have a little timestamp that I've put here to prove that I'm not really reloading the page, but yeah. Network. Alright, so what do you want to see? You want to see what the request looks like?
Response.
Okay. Say I say bang. Oh, JavaScript is the same one, that's right, sorry. Oh, good catch. Alright, let's try that again, okay? Mind you, it's just loaded up regular scripts, which is saying it's 48 KB, but that's because I've added a bunch of stuff, but Bangalore. Alright, so this is the request, and the response is regular JSON. It's just the data. I'm not like streaming HTML or anything, if that's what you're asking. This is what you wanted to see, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll certify it if that's what you want. Yeah, it's just, right, this is coming off the OpenStreetMap server thing. So yeah, that's generally how you're going to write code. No? You're basically going to get data from somewhere. Now, of course, on the server side, you might say, if is browser based on the condition, get it from a database. Run this database. But I like HTTP semantics, and generally so I like even exposing my models as services. But when it comes to scaling, and mind you, I finished this at like 4 in the morning yesterday, so I haven't thought about all that. But I don't see why it should be a problem. The only extra stuff that's coming out is, like I said, this little element map. And find it. Is this element map. And you won't even need to load sudom then after that, if you don't want to. You don't have to load all your templates, compiled and all that jazz. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the build process on this, but like, any more questions? Do you see how this is better?
So you have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
It's running out.
Okay, so I'm fine. That's cool. I thought I wouldn't even make it this far. Then I wanted to actually talk to you about the build process that I used for this, because if you have noticed, I don't have a grunt file anywhere or anything. It's this crazy little module called browserify. Have you guys tried this?
Substacks.
Yeah, man, Substack is the man. So all he says is write your code as CommonJS modules, which is, your module.export stuff. And he'll handle figuring out all the dependencies, all the required files that you need. So that means that, for example, my build step, this is what it looks like. So this is what it looks like. I don't have anything fancy that finds out what files are to be required and all that. I just say that app.js, which is the thing where we defined what our app would behave like. I just take that and I pump it out into public JavaScript app.js, and that's what I'm including on the front end. And yeah, that's it. I'm not doing some special data serialization format or anything else. That's it. And let's have a quick look at what app.js looks like. See, it's all your regular code. It just takes it. So I have to tell you, so about 15K of the 20K of code that's here, minified. So 10K is Super Agent, which is a really nice Ajax client from Wikimedia/PJ, if you guys follow. And a local storage cache from Amy. Somebody, I copied it from somebody. That's it. Really. Anyway, so it just takes this, compiles it, forms the thing, and pushes it to your file. And this scales really well, browserify, by the way. I tried it with about 100 files, took about 3 seconds. That's absolutely fine, even for a reload for me. But, any more questions? Works without JavaScript enabled. Awesome. No, anyway, my entire point of doing this talk, the reason that I chose an Ajax client instead of jQuery is that now that I have all this 100K, 200K of space to play with, now that I'm not loading your framework and your shitty ass unit tests and all that jazz, I get to indulge in a nice Ajax client. You know how awesome that is? I get my pick of CSS animation engine. As in, I don't even worry about a selector engine, guys. Like, I don't spend 80K on a selector engine just to be able. If you think about it, you guys very rarely use complicated CSS3 selectors. You're going to say hash something or dot something, tag name something. All this can be handled with document.query selector all. Fair? This is supported in IE8 and IE6 and 7 you guys have stopped using obviously already. But that's a shame. Anyway, the point is that I get to indulge in all these things. These are the choices I now can make now that I'm looking at my code at a much lower level purely on the basis of functionality. I think that's where functional programming comes from. Okay, questions? I'm running out of time.
So have you shared the code?
Not yet. Like I said, I just finished it last night. It'll go up on GitHub. I'll put it up on my Twitter and make a big noise about it.
So, if I have my templates in my cache or local storage, how will this work?
You have your templates in your local storage.
I have what I have my templates like in .html files or
Right.
static files or something like that.
Right, so all you have to do, so that's just it. You figure out your compile script, compile.js. So compile.js is where you would do this. You would generate like a JavaScript version of this. So browserify actually has some cool features where you won't even need to do this. You say require something of a particular file type, and for all files of that particular file type, it actually takes it and inlines the content into your thing. So for example, if you have you can do fs.read file sync. This is crazy, by the way. You write for your browser code, you write fs.read file, and it replaces that with the actual contents of the file when it gets generated for your browser. It's just mad. But yeah, that should just do it. That should do it. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what language you write it in or anything.
So if I understand this right, basically you define these templates as little pieces, and then templates.js are like putting it together in some kind of structure.
I'm just compiling them down to functions instead of actually taking the string and saying ejs.compile on the client side. I just compile them down to functions itself. As far as I'm concerned, a template is a function that takes data, returns string. That's it.
So the templates.js in the top there.
Yeah, that's the generated version.
Oh, okay.
That's been generated from my compile script.
Right. And in app.js, okay. So where you put it together is app.js, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And app.js is also again environment agnostic. Yeah.
So how do they communicate? So if you have 2-3 modules, let's say, how do you communicate between them? Let's say the front end app. So search when you search something, let's say you want to click on a result and then show up something else.
Okay, so at that point, no, you're talking about front-end application logic. I've given you the elements, and you can just take it over and then do what you want from that, mind you.
Okay.
So when you say how do you do this communication, like basically you click here and it does something there, right? That's purely browser-specific code at that point of time. So I can just use my regular browser code and load it where I say window, if type of window is not undefined. Then I'll say, okay, every time that this element pops this event, then do this. I can set up my handlers however I want. I haven't changed anything about possible application structure in the future. In fact, it can change. All I really wanted were references to my sections, and that solves an important problem. And alright, I guess I'm done. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Sunil. It was very cool to see you.
Really, you guys are getting